Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, good evening. This is the delayed start, 7/18, Town of New Canaan Affordable Housing Committee regular meeting, Monday, June 10th, 2024. Let's start with a roll call. John Goodwin, I am here. Um, Zoom's not up yet, but Krista Nielsen,
Here.
Jane Williams,
Here.
Bill Perrette,
Here.
Maria Weingarten,
Here.
Mike Sweeney,
Here.
Jeff Williams.
Here.
Okay. Bob, is Zoom up?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we see Hillary Ormond? Or Chris Wilson? Okay. 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 Well, let's get going. And if you see her come in, just let me know if you don't mind, please. Item number 2, minutes. Do I have motion approval of the minutes of the meeting held on May 13, 2024?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Bill made the motion, second.
Second.
I saw Krista before I heard Jane, so we'll go with Krista. Okay, and Bob, I assume you don't see Nick Belmonte, right? Okay, maybe he'll join us. We'll skip that. New Canaan real estate market update and discussion on real estate site development opportunities. John Engel and Chris Hussey. Unfortunately, Chris is under the weather. John, thank you for joining us. John, I just want to observe that I have a long history of asking you to attend meetings with me. I appreciate your willingness
And here we
multiple
are.
times. Here we are once again onto the breach. So John, I'll kick it off, and then if anybody wants to set the table for John, feel free. John, as you know, our most recent moratorium was denied. The position that the committee has taken is that we've resubmitted, as you know, and so our position is that it will be approved. So therefore, and if anybody disagrees with me, of course, tell me, but generally, our view is we need about 7 to 10 units by 2028. And so the strategy that we have taken is we have increased flexibility and creativity now versus previous to the change in the legislation of the House bill, and assumes that House bill goes through.
It did.
It did go through. Okay.
So
great.
actually, he signed it on May 21st.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Maria.
Hillary Ormond is on.
Oh, great. Okay. Hillary Ormond, kindly just say present for attendance purposes, please.
Present.
Great. Thank you. So what it means is we as a committee now have the flexibility to look at what we're calling for now a small ball strategy, which is, we can call it land banking, but trying to find, smaller developments or medium-sized projects or larger-sized projects. And so what we're talking about is, of course, needing to achieve that first moratorium, but then potentially looking at larger projects now that we know we can, bank Q point, so to speak, or it's been reaffirmed. So we're also looking at medium and larger type projects. Much more latitude in terms of how we think about this and look at this. Knowing how well versed you are in the real estate community, as well as your planning and zoning, your town council background, we wanted to get some of your thinking about, if you were in our seat, how would you think about this and looking at property, sites, sizes, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay. John, floor is yours.
Nick Monty is on now.
Oh, great. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry about
How are
that.
you?
That's a delay on my end. I had some family stuff going on.
Oh, good. I was going to take the fault, Nick, but now I can put it on you. But
No, it's all me, John. No worries.
Okay. Maybe Nick, if it's okay, we've kicked off with John Engel, and then we'll bring you on right after John. Is that okay with you?
If he wants to start.
You want to start, Nick? Yeah, actually may help your remarks as well. Okay, so so you're okay with that, John? Okay, so we'll go back to item 3, moratorium status update and discussion on moratoriums. Nick Lamonte, Bertram Moses. So Nick, as I was thinking about this, it's sort of like a pitcher at the end of his career when he's trying to come up with all kinds of pitches. It seems like with this process, we've had curveballs, screwballs, knuckleballs. But maybe if you can start with, in terms of the denial of the moratorium application, tell us, sort of what happened, what came about, and how are we going forward there, please?
Sure. So a couple weeks ago, we received word the day before the Department of Housing was statutorily required to notify us of its decision. Prior to that, even though Sarah Carey had some interactions and we did have some feedback and provided some additional information to DOH during their review process, they never sought to follow up with us about the reason that they most recently denied us for, which is a lack of 3 points, 3 hue points out of the 151 or so total that New Canaan requires. And the reason that our application was short 3 hue points really came down to a mathematical change that occurred in the state statutes based on a act that was passed in 2017. Then in 2022, from that act is when 5 years later, the points changed in the statute. And DOH never notified us during the pendency of our application of that fact. And our application, once we did find out that DOH denied us for lacking 3 points, we immediately followed up with DOH and said, what are you talking about? Our application has already all of Canaan Parish in it. If you want, pick and choose. All the underlying documents are the same. All the affordability proof is the same. All the COs are the same. So our position was, well, our application did in fact allow for DOH to utilize these extra points that we all knew New Canaan had. Since Canaan Parish has been fully built, we have a lot of surplus points at this point. And we notified DOH of those in our application. But ultimately, the first select woman and I did meet with the commissioner of the Department of Housing and some of her key staff literally that day or the day right after that we found out, to see if there was any way that we could somehow make it clear that no, you can utilize these extra points in our application so that we don't run into this silly 3-point denial situation. But that was turned down. It sounds like their lawyers or someone from the AG's office is advising the commissioner of housing, well, we don't know. There's a little bit of risk there. If in the event of litigation, if New Canaan gets approved, DOH wants to make sure that they're crossing all their T's and dotting all their I's, which I certainly understand. But at the same time, I have been fairly deeply involved in 830G law over the past few years, and I have been in a position similar to where DOH has been before. And from my legal perspective, obviously I'll say this, I represent the town, but I said this to DOH as well. I don't think that's good advice. I would feel comfortable going toe to toe with someone in the event of an appeal of a moratorium approval based on the application that we submitted. But at the end of the day, that wasn't enough for DOH. So the denial stood for a total of 3 points. After which we, by we, I mean really Sarah, lots of props to Sarah for getting the application reformatted literally within 24 hours, I want to say, to get our initial public comment period, 20-day public comment period, before we can then actually resubmit this application with definitely enough points and a very clear statement in there that, by the way, we're including other units as well. You can utilize those if by some chance the math doesn't work out. And that was actually what DOH advised us to do. DOH did during our meeting say, look, we get it. DOH has the units. No one's arguing with that. We just want to make sure it is done hyper technically to the law. And we will do our best to expedite it to the extent that we can. And really what that comes down to, at the fastest, DOH would be able to render a decision within 60 days of them getting it. The exact date for when we could submit, I don't know, is Sarah here tonight?
She's not, Nick.
Okay, so I don't know exactly off the top of my head when our 20-day public comment period locally passes. We must be getting close to it at this point. And then we'll be able to submit this application to DOH. They have a 30-day public comment period where they need to open it up for any public comments. And then they have their own review period as well. So 60 days is what DOH had told us would be the fastest they could do this. Typically, it's a 90-day process. So that's more or less where we are, Mr. Chairman. We have the application has not been refiled with DOH at this point, but we are primed and ready to go as soon as we run up the end of this local public comment period, which, as I said, I think we're right at the tail end of.
Nick, something that confused me is I understand that our original application was returned to the town for some additional clarifications early on. They would not have been in position to advise us of the shortage at that point?
You would have thought so, right? DOH did address that when we met with them and said, well, we really don't get that far into the weeds at that point. Which, you know, we questioned, but okay. But that was their answer. But you're correct, Mr. Chairman. DOH did reach out to Sarah Carey for clarifications on, I think, numbers of units specifically, and which were 1-bedroom unit versus 2-bedroom units. That was one of the questions. The other question, which actually we needed to supplement the application with updated census data that had just come out, federal census data. So yeah, there was certainly substantive interaction with DOH early. I want to say, you know what, I can't say exactly when that was, but
That's fine, don't worry about it. And Nick, you mentioned DOH saying then once it is submitted, the fastest they can do it is 60 days. Is that by statute or just how they feel they need, how much time they need?
that's how they feel. By statute, they're bound to do it in 90 days. And generally, I mean, in my experience, having gone through this in a few towns, they use the full 90 days. So I think they were trying to throw us a bone, maybe, so to speak, at least when we met with them, that, you know, they'll do it as fast as they can on their end. Their main analyst confirmed, I mean, it's the same application. We're just adding additional units from Canaan Parish. So really, it's not a heavy lift.
Okay. Questions for Nick, guys?
I have a question. So, well, sort of a comment as well. I went online to look at the list and I've shared it with fellow members of our committee here, with the activity related to the moratorium that shows all of the towns that have achieved moratorium. There have only been 13 towns in the entire state that have achieved moratorium. Of those, 5 have 2 moratoriums of the 13. And interestingly enough, there's 6 other towns that have had a rejection done in one way or another, leading to about a 6-month or more delay potentially before their moratorium application was then approved. So I just, it concerns me that there's this lack of support for towns that are trying to create affordable, that are trying to do the right thing and work as a good partner with towns that are getting it done in one way or another. And I guess my thought is, have you seen any of those? Have you known about how and why maybe some of these other towns might have been denied their applications? Is this similar to what we've just experienced?
So I know exactly what you're referring to because I looked at that list recently myself, and you're right. Sometimes it is like a 6-month time frame in between an initial denial and when a town has ultimately received a moratorium. I don't think we're looking at that 6 months for where we are right now. And I know that's not the question you asked, but I'll just put that to bed because I asked that question during our meeting as well. And the answer was basically, well, they sort of withdrew and then reapplied, and it was they didn't really do it right away. So here we're literally, as soon as we're denied, we're right back in the swing of it. So I feel more comfortable saying or being hopeful that DOH can meet that 60-day expedited timeline that they suggested. But in terms of your question, I mean, Westport was not a denial, I guess. It was an approval, but then after Westport was then subject to an appeal, or should I say DOH was appealed, their granting of Westport's moratorium. We joined the town, that is, as an interested party. And throughout the pendency of that case, I mean, you can't make this up. DOH lost evidence that they had relied on to grant Westport its moratorium. And so the discussions were leading towards, well, DOH is thinking about rescinding Westport's moratorium that they granted. And now they're in a court case and they can't find whatever information they need. And then later something happened where they did find it, and ultimately the case ended up settling. So that's done and over with, thankfully. But I mean, that's, I guess, the best I can give as illustrative of my experience thus far with Fairfield County towns and DOH.
Bill, you had a question?
No, I think it was answered.
Okay. Anybody else? Nick, Maria advised us that HB 5474 was indeed signed by the governor, which was, giving us, the ability to use our Hugh Point inventory going forward, as you know. And I think when we last, but what from your perspective now happens, I think we talked about the litigation that we're currently involved with. I guess that renders that mute, or how's that process going to work?
Well, I'm not going to say it renders that process moot. And I'm not going to say all that much more because I see Mr. Stone's on the call here. And that case, I'll say, depending
Let
on,
me be clear. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about the litigation regarding the 3830G property.
no, I understand that. I'm
Okay.
talking about our pending appeal of the DOH denial from 2022. That case may be rendered moot. I don't want to say more until we see what happens with the application that we're about to file with DOH.
Okay. And maybe you don't want to comment on this either, but with the assumption that the refiling gets approved, and then looking at the backlog of viewpoints we will now have, we as a committee are assuming we only have a need of 7 to 10 units to achieve potentially a future moratorium in 2028, right?
Yeah, I mean, my calculation is we need 15 or so hue points.
Viewpoints.
So that's how it came to 7 to 10 units.
Does, I'd just like to affirm that that thinking is ballpark, let's call it.
Yes, but. And you got to get a but because you're talking to a lawyer here. But that is right. If there aren't any other novel arguments or reasons that DOH comes up with for a denial. I only say that because I don't see. So whenever a town down here has filed for a moratorium, we have seen certain lawyers representing certain advocacy groups take legal action in opposition. And we have seen several, I mean, it's basically a copy and paste of the same arguments from one town to the next. The holdover points, this is what we're talking about, what the bill 5474 just very clearly set out is holdover points are legit. You build, you can front load, call it whatever you want. It's building affordable housing. That's the point here. We're trying to build as much affordable housing as we can. And so the legislature just passed that bill. Yes, holdover points, so to speak, are allowed. That's one of these arguments that we've seen come out. And that really, in my professional opinion, was the biggest hurdle that we had to potentially jump over.
Hillary Orman has her hand up.
Okay. Finish your, did you finish your point, Nick?
Almost. So I guess just to wrap that up, 5474, the bill, just took care of the strongest argument that I think we have seen against DOH granting moratoriums when we're trying to use these older properties, which has Westport did it as well. I mean, Brookfield, we all know. But my point here is there are some other arguments. I think they're fairly weak. DOH has rejected them outright in the past. So to bring it full circle, yes, I think that hue points, 7 more units, 15 points, whatever, is right. but there are other arguments and comments that we will still see in the future as to why DOH still shouldn't grant our moratorium. I guess that's what I'll say.
Okay, thank you. Hillary?
What's the procedural posture of that case right now that might be rendered moot? Like, when's your next court date? And are there any briefings or filings that need to, that might impact this issue or resolve it?
So we have a scheduling order that I've actually asked the court to stay at this point until we, I want to get a decision from DOH. I want to get our moratorium approval. And then really, I also don't want to, spend the taxpayers' money running up my bill on a case that, yeah, may frankly go away, but it might not. So, yeah, we have a scheduling order, but that is going to get pushed. Briefs would have been starting to become due like now. So that has not happened yet. And there, even before briefs, what DOH put into the record wasn't everything that I think should be in the record, that would assist the court in making a decision. So anyway, procedurally, you asked the procedural posture question. We're still early in that case, and it stayed. Or I don't think the court's actually acted on that, but that's the pending posture.
And there's no thought to just filing a quick, I quote unquote, quick motion, asking for the court to render the case moot?
Well, I don't want to ask the court to do that.
Okay.
Because maybe
You don't want an adverse decision on it either, like while our moratorium application's pending, I guess, too.
Well, sort of. I guess I'll say this. If we get denied for our moratorium, I'm not done with that case.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, Nick, thank you very much. Hope also okay with the family.
Thanks, John. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's distressing. The governor has said to the town, bring me a plan. This town has executed on plans. Towns completed affordable housing. Towns put together an affordable housing committee. Town decided that our strategy at least would be to achieve moratoriums because that's what's laid out in statute. And it's distressing that statute, this is my personal opinion, is being manipulated.
Well, I'll just add to that, John. I think I may have said this at our meeting last week, but the town has spent a lot of resources, thrown a lot of resources at this affordable housing issue in terms of money spent to build Canaan Parish and Millport, money spent on attorneys, staff time, our time. And we will obviously have to continue to do so because the path forward is not clear or easy. And I just think that that's something everybody should know, that we're not just sitting back and resting on our laurels. We are attacking this problem in every way we know how. And unfortunately, we still keep coming up empty, but it's not for a lack of trying.
I would just add that, we have to remember that the units that we're creating are forever affordable, 100% affordable and forever affordable. When you look at 830G, only 30% of projects are affordable and those expire. They go away in 4 years. So why this is not a strategy that's embraced by the state is beyond me. Because in fact, this is probably the fastest way to get the most units of affordable that other towns should want to embrace. And this sort of signaling where you've rejected 6 towns and made them wait and jump through additional hoops, it appears to me, is not okay. And I think that the state should really think about whether this is a legitimate and good policy going forward. And maybe they should start to become more partners with towns.
Yeah, ultimately, I think from the governor's perspective, It's one thing for departments within the state, they have their in-place constituencies, but the governor is the chief executive of this state. He's running a company in a way. We're the clients, we're the customers. And I think the governor needs to speak to the heads of his departments and tell them to play things, sorry to use another sports metaphor, that's what I do, play it down the fairway. And that way we can then best put together the plan and bring it to the state that the governor has specifically requested us to do. So, okay. Mr. Engel, are you still here?
First to arrive, last to leave.
Again, John, thank you for coming. I won't repeat my intro, but yeah, it still seems to me you have to work on a game plan. And so you've heard what our game plan is. We have a lot of flexibility, but call it 7 to 10 units by 2028, but then still thinking we need to consider potentially medium to larger situations for that further moratorium down the road. So your thoughts?
I
John?
think by my calculation, you need like 700 more to get to 10%. So
Well, we
better get started.
We've waved the white flag on 10%. So as a committee,
eventually we
as
have
a
to get
committee.
there. So thanks for inviting me. I was actually excited when Jane Williams asked me to come in, and I said, what kinds of things do you want to talk about? And then I rattled off a whole bunch of things that it occurred to me that you should be talking about. So I'll use that and bring you all up to speed on our little conversation. I said, do you want to talk about recent case studies where we got it right and others where we blew it? And she wrote, yes. And by that, I meant, I thought that the Fowler purchase was a win. That was an example where the land trust organized it, the purchase of 6 acres, and paid for a third. Town paid for a third, and the state paid for a third, and we were able to acquire. And the Fowlers contributed. How many thirds are we up to? Some portion, and that got acquired, and it was strategic because it was 6 acres adjacent to the Audubon 40 acres. So somebody at the land trust had already thought through what is strategic, where do we, and made priorities. And that was important. We have to know what our priorities are. And then we have to know, they approached the neighbors and they explained and educated the neighbors. And we don't really have a mechanism for educating neighbors in this town about, what's going to happen in your neighborhood if we go forward with something. But they educated the neighbors on how much traffic and what kind of parking plan and all that, and got buy-in and actually got contributions from the neighbors. So I would call the Fowler a win. Another land trust case study you can ask me about, or we can document later, was what I call the Firefly Meadow. Massarella. In this case, it was a tax strategy, but Massarella, who had owned properties both on 123 and elsewhere in town, was behind on his taxes. And so he looked to, but he had extra property. And so he looked to donate that property, but he couldn't afford to donate property to the land trust without getting some cash consideration in order to pay the transfer taxes and pay back taxes and what have you. So there was a cash tax strategy in order to get a donation and a gifting kind, or whatever they call it. I'm vague on the terminology, but the land trust puts together a strategy and helps homeowners like Massarella do this. They have a strategy where they know what an IRS yellow book appraisal has to be ordered, and the land trust takes care of all this so that Massarella doesn't have to be an expert in tax strategy or the value of land. So I would call that another win. So that's 2 examples. Where did we blow it? I think we blew it when Aquarian approached the first selectman and said, do you want to buy the Aquarian property off of Weed Street? And the answer came back, no. And partly because nobody had really thought through what would we do with it. We didn't have a land acquisition fund at the time. There was no committee to evaluate land acquisitions at the time, still isn't. If Aquarian offered us land now, I don't think we have a protocol in place for evaluating the opportunity or even going out and asking private citizens if they want to contribute toward it. The land trust is probably the closest thing we have toward that. I will say as an aside, another thing where we got it right, when we put the land acquisition fund together, we specifically did not require it to be an open space. We made it a land acquisition fund for open space or affordable housing. So the town council put that in place. The first selectman made a suggestion in the first phase of the budget, but then the Board of Finance cut it. And then in the second year, the Board of Finance cut it. And then I think in the third year, it finally got a $50,000 amount of funding. But there is no habit, there is no suggestion for how to continue to fund the land acquisition fund. And so that's another opportunity that we're missing. I can pause now if any of you want to ask me a question. Keep going. Okay.
Hillary's hand is up.
Hillary?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So just quickly reviewing, I think our land acquisition fund is great. And I'm in concert with this particular state statute, which is 7-131R. It does say, and John, you and I have talked about this, that when you establish a land acquisition fund and it can be used for open space, recreation, or housing under the state statute, there shall be deposited in said fund annually an amount not to exceed the amount which would be generated by the imposition of a tax of 2 mills against the property subject to tax in such municipality. So, arguably, we should be funding this fund under state statute and frankly under our ordinance, which does say that it should be funded, that it must be funded annually. Now, so I don't know what that would, what that would come to, or whether it have to be more than a nominal amount, but it does seem like there's a responsibility that's not being fulfilled by the town. Anyway, just something to note.
It would be, and just to bring everybody up to speed, we have a mechanism in place where building permit funds go toward affordable housing. And then that gets, and in order to get access to that fund to make affordable housing, you have to come and ask for it. So typically Scott Hobbs, on behalf of the Affordable Housing Committee, comes and asks the town council every year or every other year to sweep the funds for some particular projects, and the town council has to approve it. So the checks and balances are in place, that when you create a fund, it doesn't just get spent when the first selectman feels like it. You have to go to the town council and you have to ask. And not only that, but the Affordable Housing Committee is not the only one allowed to ask for the funds. I could go ask for the funds and say, hey, town council, please release $1 million so that I can go build some affordable housing in town. So the mechanism is there. The town council decides each time. So, but what's not there is an ordinance on the books, Hillary, where we, like we did for the building permits, where it's automatic. And so right now we're relying on educating the first selectman each year and the Board of Finance each year as to the importance and the non-discretionary nature of this. So I'm glad you just started the ball rolling by educating us on what the law says, but you're going to have to do that every year if we don't put an automatic mechanism in place.
I agree.
Well, John, question for you. We're looking at, what properties are town-owned, as you know better than anyone. A huge cost in this town of doing anything is cost of the land. But by definition, that will increase density. So one of the other things we're also looking at is, are there opportunities, so, I mean, call that greenfield, although a parking lot's not greenfield, but you know what I mean. Are there brownfield opportunities, do you believe? I mean, can there be a strategy to purchase properties, that can be upgraded, converted, et cetera, et cetera? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going out of order now, but,
I'm sorry.
no,
You
that's
can go
fine.
in order if you want.
No, I think that the first inclination is to go after big parcels, right? Because you need big parcels in order to get the economies of scale. And you look to something like Canaan Parish, that's something, you need a big parcel, and it needs to have good access to the roads. It has to be on town water and sewer. I'll use an example because otherwise it's hard to imagine things in the abstract. But when the 36 acres of Paul Simon property came on the market, everybody said, oh, there's a big parcel. How close is it to 123? How close is it to the water and sewer? Does it have sufficient access to be an affordable, a more dense development? What's the wetland situation? So, when a big property like that comes available, everybody springs into action and evaluates whether that round peg can fit into our square hole. And we've all been looking at the same 20 properties for the last 15 or 20 years. What about the Leaf Pile? What about the Talmadge Hill property we own? What about the Clark estate? I think that if any of those were easy, they'd have been done. So I really do think that your small ball strategy, and there's a variety of small ball strategies, are going to be where we're going to have to focus most of our energies. If any of those other opportunities fall in our lap, great. But I think we've already shown that they're all difficult. So with that being said, one way to do this is that if the town owns it. Another is for the town to acquire it, but to acquire a lot, any building lot, is gone from roughly 700,000 to about $1 million. There's maybe one, maybe two properties on the market at any given time under $1 million. That's it. And I don't see that trend reversing anytime soon. So if we've already exhausted the properties we own, and it's going to cost us $1 million a lot to acquire property, then we are going to, therefore, mathematically speaking, we have to employ a higher density strategy on properties. I'll just jump into ADUs. One of the strategies that we're seeing around the country, not just in California, but most aggressively in California, is to allow ADUs by right. And everybody was very worried that that was going to change the character of neighborhoods in California. And in fact, I think 50,000 applications were submitted in that first year. California didn't stop there. They didn't just say that you could build an ADU by right in your backyard and set certain limits on the height and the coverage, but they've gone on to say that you can actually subdivide your property and divide your house from your ADU. And one of the things, and in so doing, they allow you, if you can separate the ADU from the main house, then you can finance it separately. And so now California says, so why isn't everybody taking advantage of this? And what we found was it took the banks some time to sort of mobilize and figure out how to evaluate these ADUs on newly subdivided lots and how to specifically, finance them. We may have to employ an ADU strategy in order to spread the affordable housing around town and in every neighborhood in a way that doesn't devastate one neighborhood at the expense of another. Any questions on that so far?
What's that?
Any questions so far? I figure I'll take a breath.
Well, go ahead, Jay.
The last time we talked about ADUs in here, my impression, sorry, I'm trying to get my mic on, but it doesn't want to, was that it would be very hard, for example, for ADUs to help at all with 830G, that they're outside the parameters, isn't that right?
Can't deed restrict them.
Can't deed restrict them, therefore
You
they're.
have to deed restrict
Yeah.
them, I think was the issue. And if you don't,
To
and you
make
have to
them
put them on the
right.
open market for it to count. So that's the stumbling block.
They have to be on the open market to account.
To
to
count
count.
as a unit that was made available widely to the public and to openly advertised.
Okay.
So I mean, it would, maybe for that missing middle, it would probably, but that's, again, that doesn't help anybody towards, our 10% or anything like that necessarily.
So it helps towards lowercase affordable housing, to use
Right.
Krista's term, not necessarily the state's counting and
Capital A.
definition, capital A, affordable housing.
I think that it's going to require all three parties to cooperate on this. I think there's going to have to be modifications eventually to the state law. I don't see us changing our laws to look like California's anytime soon, but I think eventually, we'll see whether the California and the Georgia and some of the other experiments, work, and we may head there. But in the meantime, we just have to get better organized. I think we should be more organized about our own fund. We should be more organized about our own management. And we ought to be more organized about the kinds of requests we make of P&Z in order to make what kinds of changes to our zoning. So just by getting a more better instructions to our P&Z about how we'd like to modify our own local laws and our own first selectmen and board of finance about how we'd like to see the budget approached, all of these ways of getting organized are going to make up for or substitute for a lack of money in some cases. For example, there are 2-family duplexes all up and down East Avenue and Main Street and 106. I don't think there's any left on South Avenue. They've already been taken down. When one of them when one of these large lots on South Avenue came before P&Z a year or so ago and asked for to be subdivided and to build 2 small homes, P&Z said, nope, doesn't say you can do that. And so we said no. And the result is 1 large home. So if we have a point of view on more small homes instead of large homes, that would be a small, way to influence P&Z on the kinds of things that this committee decides we need. Another example is that a Brooklyn developer came out from the city and said, I'd like to redevelop 113 Main Street from office space, largely empty office space into 24 units, and I'll make 4 or 5 of them affordable. And P&Z said, well, we need a full set of engineering, a full set of elevations, floor plans. And the developer said, it's going to cost me a couple $100,000 and probably 6 months of development to bring you to answer these questions. And there's no assurance that this is what the town wants. I don't feel like I think there's too much risk here. And he went back to Brooklyn. So now instead of having an application, and by the way, P&Z, some members of P&Z said, yeah, we'd like to see 24 small units. And other people said, no, we'd like to see more 3 bedrooms. And some other people said, no, we'd like to see a mix between 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom. So really, there was no point of view. Nobody's really even educated from this committee's point of view, P and Z, what kind of housing do we want in town that we should even be asking for? It was every individual member's preference. So, because I remember when we were asking other applicants, well, how many, what is the mix of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom units? And how will it impact the schools? You know, we got educated on how many kids will be entering the schools when we build 20, 30, 40, 100 units. So P and Z should be asking that or wondering that each time. And they ought to know whether they want 1 bedroom versus 3 bedroom units. So anyway, now 6 months later, a new developer has come asking about the same building, and he's asking for 12, not 24. And he's proposing 1 affordable housing unit. I don't think that this town has a point of view as to whether they prefer the first project or the second. And that is what I mean about getting organized.
Can I ask you, you mentioned when we spoke, relationship with realtors. And for this process, it would be very helpful for realtors to understand what their relationship could be if they find out about a piece of property and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that might happen?
Yeah, so there's there is a document called an open listing as opposed to an exclusive listing. And realtors don't like open listings, but they do exist out there legally. But most of us don't use them. An exclusive listing is where an agent says, you give me the right to go represent your property out there, and I work for you. And we are exclusive to each other with respect to this property. An open listing can be shared by many realtors, where it says, if you bring me a customer, you will get paid. Realtors don't like to invest a lot of time on a property knowing that anybody can bring a customer to that property. So we just don't see it, in Connecticut, but it's legal to do that. And I suggest that if the town were to say, hey, to all realtors, in order to cast the widest net possible and to incent all realtors, would offer open listings. And I think that means that we would have, it wouldn't just be a, hey, all realtors, if you have an idea, come in and talk to the first selectman. I think that there needs to be a mechanism in place. So the realtor should come to town hall and fill out an open listing agreement, with the town, such that, it's all spelled out, and get a bit of training, if you will, get a piece of paper from the town on what the town is looking for and what are the criteria. These are the kinds of things that we're looking for. This is, this is the price points, this is the size of the lots. This is how we define an opportunity. So first, we ought to define an opportunity. We ought to cast the net. We ought to offer open listings to anybody who brings us an opportunity. I've been approached by a New Canaan resident who owns many. I actually have two such customers who own multiple duplexes in town. And so I would be incented to go down to town hall, fill out a form such that if and identify these properties to town, so that if the town wanted to buy a couple of duplexes in order to meet your next moratorium goal, that I would get credit for bringing the opportunity to you first. I think that was as far as our thinking got, but we ought to use the open listing mechanism to open up the net. And that way, because it's in writing, it'll be easy to document who brought us, town, the idea first. and whether you have to have the listing or it's enough that you are aware of the property, and that if it does become available in the future. So we have to think through that.
So John, under an open listing, then the broker's protected then by going through this mechanism, almost registering the property. So then the broker knows that she or he's protected in the event the deal happens then.
Right. That's how I'm imagining this, but but we should talk it over with the Board of Realtors and find out if just push back or they don't like that idea or, but I think that would work.
Would the town have to set comp up front?
Yeah, I think that has to be answered. And given the fact that, all the NAR lawsuits are causing anxiety around buyer's agent compensation, I think the town would do well to offer buyer's agent compensation if you can bring us a deal, whether it's an off-market deal or an on-market deal. If you bring it to us first, then you will get your 2.5%, as written on the sheet. And therefore, you're protected. Go have those conversations. You represent the town.
So absent a pot of money in a fund being set aside, if the town were to find a property or through this mechanism or through another mechanism, how quickly can the town move, not just procedurally with the Board of Finance and going to the town council to acquire land, but also then to appropriate? How would an appropriation be done to purchase a $2.5 million property?
Glad you asked, because Kevin Moynihan said, because I brought 28 Grove Street came on the market, and I brought it to the town hall and said, this is an opportunity. It's strategic. It's the only other access to the town's lumberyard lot from Grove Street. The town can only access the lumberyard lot currently from Elm Street. So this represents the only property you can get that gives you an alleyway, a roadway, if you will, a right of way all the way to the back of your lot. And if the town ever decides to deck the lumberyard, this is going to be an important egress. And Kevin said, you're right, but we don't have any money. And he said, but I think I can put this thing together. So knowing that the client needed some time, the listing agent said, okay, I can work with your timetable as long as you commit. So as long as the town was committed, and that took a vote of, I guess, the town, quickly the town council and the selectmen were convened, and they were able to vote and sign the commitment. Then the closing could take place 60 days, 90 days later.
And the Board of Finance too.
And the Board of Finance.
And it was done,
Quickly, very quickly.
Very quickly.
So that's an example. And in that case, I brought it to the town and I got paid because it was a listed property by the listing agent, by the seller. But if I bring you something tomorrow that's not listed, then in that case, the town would have to have identified on the open listing what the standard compensation is.
So I'm assuming in that whole process you just described for 28 Grove, because that also came to planning and zoning for an 824 referral for the town to acquire the land, but that's probably after the town made the commitment with the financing. So you made the commitment with the financing and then got.
Well,
I don't want planning and zoning to be the one slowing us down, but any land acquisition does have to come before planning and zoning for 824 referral.
right, and I had to set that expectation with the agent, the listing agent, that this is subject to town, this is contingent on town approvals. These approvals have to take place, but the first selectman has already indicated, and town council members have already indicated that they're on board, but we have to go through those votes. But you're right. Planning and zoning could have said no, at the last minute. So he was taking that risk. In order to win a piece of property, we're going to have to make sure that we have an easy and identifiable and relatively risk-free approval process.
And it was done in executive session as well, so it was not made public.
And naturally, as soon as we owned that, we said, oh, could we make this affordable? Could we rent this out and add it to our affordable housing rules? Which sort of gets me to my next topic, which is that Scott Hobbs has told me once, if he's not told me a million times, that it's much harder to manage many small ball than it is one big complex. And he says, we don't have the staff to manage what we have, much less a small ball strategy. So in which boilers and roofs with some age all over town, we just don't have the skill. We don't have the people. We don't have the skill sets. So how are we going to staff up for that in the future? In the end, we decided not to rent out 28 Grove because we thought that the liability for the town was far greater than the income we could get from it. So if we're going to own properties like 28 Grove, we have to start figuring out how we're going to manage them, the cost and the process of it.
John, how do you get to the strategic plan of really what you want to do? Because some of everything you've said makes a lot of sense, but how does the town get to a strategic plan? What's the process? I mean, is it town council, first selectmen, P&Z?
I think it comes from you. I mean, I think that it comes from this committee. I think this committee is really going to have to tell the town council what it needs from them, and P&Z what it needs from them. I'm happy to help you any way I can, but sitting in there on P&Z, I give you an example where I feel like I'm failing, the process because I'm not in sync with my fellow P&Z members when an opportunity comes in front of us, 113 Main. But I felt the same inadequacy when I sat there on town council, and I watched us not fund, after we created a land acquisition fund, watch it not get funded, for the second year in a row. And I didn't know what do I do? Pass an ordinance? I can't make the Board of Finance put that, I can't put things in the budget on town council. I can only take them out. So we felt sort of, stuck. So yeah, I think it's going to come from this committee where you say, P&Z, we'd really like you to, these are our objectives, and we'd like to see that sort of baked into the, planning, the next iteration of the planning and zoning regulations, so that it's clear to a developer, 113 Main, or the guy Chris from Darien. After Chris from Darien, I don't know what his last name is, but it's probably better. But Chris from Darien developed Forest Street. And when it was all done, I asked him, would you do it again? And he said, no, too risky. Took too long to get approvals, too risky. I was like, but it's all sold through. And it's beautiful. He says, yeah, it's just too risky for a developer to come in and try a project, and go through a very long process and maybe get denied. And I thought, we've got to do better so that the Chris from Darien, is and maybe, and part of that, I think, is that 113 Main Street application came to us now twice with pre-application hearings. And that's something that we used to do on P&Z. We got out of the habit for a while. And this is the first time we've seen pre-application hearings. And so maybe we should, get really organized about 830G related or affordable related pre-application hearings, so that we're all on the same sheet of music over on P&Z. Same thing with what do we need from town council? What do we need from Board of Finance? So.
John, question on demand for units in a mixed income project. Meaning, I think you know what I mean, but just to be clear. You as a realtor, so let's say we put together a project, I'll make this up, and I'm making this up, a lumberyard. And it's, make this up, 100 units. And it's determined that we need 30 units to be affordable. And you're now leasing the rest of the units. Is it a challenge or not?
In all my conversations with Scott Hobbs, he says that we have a long waiting list for 3-bedroom, a smaller waiting list for 2-bedroom, and no waiting list for 1-bedroom and studios. So the inclination, when David Rucci comes to me with the 12 units of at 113 Main this month, is he says, and we've got, you know, a 1-bedroom, you know, affordable, and but most of his units are a mix of 2s and 3s with this 1-bedroom affordable. To which I said, come on, you know, you can do better than that. First of all, we don't want 5% of the square feet, but we don't have a standard. This is just John Engel, you know, getting upset with David's application, you know, because that's how I felt at the time. But I said, should I be measuring this on 1 out of 12 units, which is what, 9%? Or should I be looking at the total square feet and how much of that you've dedicated to affordable? So I said, I think you can do better than one-bedroom unit in a 30,000 square foot building, 750 feet out of 30,000 square foot building, as I think it was. Anyway, the short answer is people want to be in New Canaan for the schools. They want to bring in families. And so the demand for the 2 and especially the 3s is the highest
Yeah,
demand.
but my question's a little bit different. So let's say you have 10 3-bedroom units. And we've specified as part of the project that 3 of the 10 will be affordable and 7 will not be. Are there any challenges in people being in an affordable, in a project?
Is there a stigma?
Yes.
I don't think there's a stigma if it's a smart development. I don't think, and I'm just going to use the ones on 123, Canaan Parish. I think that they're generally admired the way they look, the layout, the way they run. They've got amenities like, you know, that outdoor space. They got rules in place. I think it was, somebody pointed out, they said, you know, when you have too little space, and you give somebody a balcony, they're going to use it to store the snow tires. And I don't know if that's like a real example, but they said, you know, if you don't give them adequate storage space and they got to store their snow tires somewhere, and there's no rule against storing your snow tires on your balcony, then that's what you're going to do. But I think in the case of, so they learned all those lessons when they took down the old Canaan Parish and built the new Canaan Parish, that through a combination of good looking architecture, adequate parking, adequate storage, and rules against anybody, you know, getting over on the system by storing their snow tires, you know, on their balcony, that combination makes that an extremely successful project. And I don't think anybody knows or cares what the income level is of the neighbors around them. But that's just my feeling.
You just popped another question in my head, which is parking. So it's let's use the lumberyard example again. You know, the argument is there's a TOD, you know, it's next to TOD. Do you think we need as much parking as we've historically thought about needing in New Canaan?
In that specific location.
In a dense location, in-town dense location. I don't want to get into P&Z battles,
Are you
but
talking about the
I'm
parking for
just-
the residential
yes,
development, or are you talking about parking for
Residential.
commuters?
no, residential,
Take care of the commuters separately.
residential.
No,
And I'm asking you as a real, I don't want to get into P&Z battles. I'm asking you as a real, because I've been through them. I'm asking you as a realtor.
having parking, on-site parking is important, and having 2 parking spaces is substantially better than 1. So only as a realtor, I will say that I have had people move to town and look at our $1 million condos and reject $1 million condo or another over the fact that it's only got a 1-car garage and maybe 1, surface parking spot as well, saying I need 2-car garage because that's what I've always had. And when I survey the 50 condo complexes around town, the 700 units, I'm going to say very, very few of them have 2-car garages. A minority of them have 2-car garages. And they seem to work. So it's a benefit. Is it necessary? No. It is a criteria. It's an important criteria. I'll tell you, an even more important criteria is washer and dryer in the unit. And our 1970s units that don't have that, like Heritage Hill, are at a major disadvantage, mostly because of the washer dryer situation, not the parking situation.
John, you talked a little bit about communicating with the town and letting realtors know how they can be helpful, but you also talked a bit about letting the rest of our neighbors know in this process what they could do to be helpful. And when you talked about the Fowler property and educating neighbors, et cetera, I think that's a very good example of bringing people along as we make decisions or as we recommend decisions, not making them. But what can we tell our fellow townspeople how they can help in this process if they want to?
I mean, I think that, I've been approached by some of these long-standing New Canaanites now who are thinking about selling their property in the next year, couple years. They don't even know that town is a candidate to buy this. They don't know what the advantage would be to selling their duplex to the town versus anyone else. Town has to get organized and say, geez, if you put this into the affordable housing pool, you, for the next, is it 20 years, 40? It has to be 40? 40. It could be, tax-free. You put it in the affordable housing pool and continue to get the rent you've been getting, but you no longer have to pay taxes. Something like that. There is no incentive. There's no difference. There's no awareness the town is capable of buying these, wants to buy these. Could town see, and that's where the legislature comes in. And, if you wanted to pull one out, could you put one in? Can you substitute a unit with another unit? And even if the legislature modified this so that we could, pull things in and out of the pool, that would give us some more flexibility. And maybe that's all we need, but we don't even know because we haven't asked any of these owners, what's keeping you from. I have one now who owns 4 duplexes, and he's been renting them to the same people for decades, and they're all paying, I want to say, $2,000 a side on these. They're clearly affordable housing units, and there's just been no opportunity for that guy to get a tax break for doing what he's doing, renting these out to school teachers and young families for the last 20 years. And so if it changed hands and it went from maybe the father to the kids, is there any mechanism to basically swap units so that, if circumstances change, we can change with them? I don't know if separating the development, the affordable housing rights from the ownership is possible in the future. It would be nice that if the town didn't have to own the units, but they were deed restricted. Does the town need to own it? to get credit for it, or just deed restrict it?
As long as the unit's deed restricted, you can sell it, but it has to be deed restricted.
Okay. Even to tell planning and zoning what neighborhoods we would prefer higher density on. For instance, the duplexes on East Avenue. Could you build a duplex, but could you by right build a duplex behind your duplex? The duplexes on Old Stamford. Could you by right build a duplex behind your duplex? You know, if for the right to double the density on your property, you deed restricted it. That's the kind of, I guess, and then let P and Z do their thing, which is, you know, go through and determine what exactly the requirements would have to be in order to make that. But if you determine part of small ball is to increase the density on, you know, on certain streets and name those streets. Because I can think of some examples where you have a house, Mr. Carp bought 30.36 acres. I just remember this, 0.36, maybe it was 0.38 acres on Richmond Hill, knocked down the house and built 2 houses on 0.18. But I know of some of these duplexes that are sitting on half an acre each. So I know that there's room to do what Mr. Carp did 10 years ago and build 2. And do you want 2 townhouses side by side, like that have backyards, like that example? Or do you want them front and back, where you have less density on the street and you've used up the backyard? Giving that, you know, that's probably a question for P and Z.
Ironically, I will say from the state perspective, and at least the laws that they're looking at, they only care about, for fair share, they're only looking at 3+ units on a lot. And they're not even counting townhomes. Like, so there's this, you know, false narrative out there that everything is 90% is single family. Well, single family detached is much less than that number. And it's just, they're not even accounting for the fact that this is gentle density development that makes sense in towns that are smaller, that have narrower roads, that don't have wide roads, so you could have on-street parking. There's a reason that you need to have off-street parking. So these are all issues that have to also be addressed at the state level, because it's not a fair assessment to put us to an urban standard.
Yeah, well, you're spot on. It's all about a big city strategy. And then they're taking a big city strategy and they're saying, well, smaller towns have to do it.
When we bought 28 Grove Street, the building next to it was made available to us, and we could have basically put 3 together. But when I asked Art Cassavant at Scott's urging a bunch of questions about that, he said, well, you know, the economics got a lot tougher since the last time we did this. We did it with 8% tax credits, and now they're 4%. And
with a minimum number of units
and you have to find somebody who will buy these units, and they usually negotiate. And he went through all the things that I was going to need to know about trying to put the economics together of this. But I said, you know, if you combined these 3 together, you might be able to. It's about the same amount of square feet, a lot, as the Red Cross building. So could we build, you know, 20 units on Grove Street? And the final answer was, there's no assurance that the state would even approve this as affordable housing in the end. So not only was the 4% an impediment, and putting the assemblage together was tough. The 4% versus 8% was tough. Finding somebody who would buy the credits was tough. And then finally, he said, there's no assurance that the state will give you credit for it in the end. And so we didn't do anything. I mean, it was Stanford Hospital that owns the house next door. And they said, you know, are you interested? And there wasn't really anybody to hear it or go through this exercise of investigating.
John, do you see any developers, maybe not necessarily in New Canaan, but in the area, who are, you know, adept at these type strategies?
Yeah, actually, you know, it was funny, I'll use his name, David Genovese in
He spoke to us.
Darien.
Yeah. a few
Yeah,
weeks
he
ago.
came to Rotary and he told us the story of building the Corbin project. And afterward, I said, just like I asked the Chris from Darien guy, would you do it again? And he says, yeah, I'm looking for more projects, you know. So I do know that guys like David Genovese are looking for projects and wants to work hand in hand with towns like he did on the Corbin project, not an adversary, you know, strategy. So I know they're out there, and I'm encouraged by the fact that we have an application at 113 on Burtis Avenue that we approved, and now we have one on 113 Main Street that is coming. So I'm encouraged that we don't have a reputation for no on density. A land use lawyer told me that Darien is much, much harder, has a much tougher reputation right now than we do for working with developers. So I don't know if that's true, but that's the reputation lately. So I'm encouraged that there are developers out there who say they want to do it, and we seem to be willing to work with them. But we need to get organized. I mentioned database,
Yeah.
and you said, what does that mean?
No, I said, what kind of data?
I think that we need a much better database on our land. I mean, you know, we've got 6,000 or 7,000 households in this town, and I don't think we have as good an understanding of each of those lots as we should. And so I think that we should be putting together our database.
I mean, the town land?
I think the town should own a database of opportunities and have a better understanding of all the land so that we can start to evaluate opportunities. If you ask the land trust, I asked the land trust, hey, this property might be coming available. Oh, yes, that's that is a strategic A+. It's on our list. And I thought, well, if the land trust has a list, we should have a list. And the land trust has a list of everybody who's contiguous to that property that they're going to hit up for money. That's what I mean by a database. Knowing the land, knowing who are the contiguous property owners, knowing whether it's, I was brought an opportunity last week, big parcel. And the first thing I asked the owner was, I wanted to know the whole history of it. And I want to see the whole file. And they're like, I don't know. And does it have town water, sewer? Where are the wetlands, et cetera, et cetera? So that should be easy for us to put together that database.
Krista.
Our project committee is working on it.
Well, I will say that, so Ty and Bond handles the town's GIS data for us. They're an outside consultant, and having worked in other places with GIS data, I've been a little surprised that it's not as easy yet as you're suggesting it should be. I mean, in other places, this is all just kind of assembled and you put it in a map and bring it up, and it's like they're having to like piece together, okay, I got to add wetlands to the, it's not as.
Oh,
simple
no,
as
yeah,
that.
it's not just like, oh, yeah, it doesn't exist. You're
Yeah,
right.
So, I mean, it has to be built is my point.
It has to
not-
be built.
But the pieces are there.
But Tig and Bond, it's funny you mentioned that. When they did the 2018 reval, they actually produced a heat map. They never even produced it. I've gone looking for it. They didn't produce it. If they did, they didn't make it public. A heat map on New Canaan properties. I mean, I was like, wow, this is awesome. So they have data that we should ask for. Same thing with the Utilities Commission. They said, that when they are putting together the database for cell tower. And that's just another example of a database the town should own. And Rich Townsend explained to me that the old cell survey we have was just an extrapolation. The new one actually is going every 40 feet, making a data call and a voice call and logging the data, and it'll be a very much more accurate. And it will tell you not only what the current conditions are, but much more accurately what will happen if you added a tower here or here or here. And that's what I mean by getting our data house in order. The Utilities Commission determined they didn't have enough data to study the problem. And I suspect that may be true here too.
Anybody else for John? John, thank you very much. Obviously goes without saying. Any other ideas, feel free to ping us, okay? Okay, item number 5.
Am I
project development.
dismissed?
Sorry?
I'm dismissed.
Thank you.
You're not dismissed. We'd love for you to stay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that?
You did. You really did.
Oh, did you get
I was-
everything? I didn't mean to
I was
cut you
going
off.
down the pages, yep.
Okay,
And
item,
sometime for Krista's committee, I think that you're aware of a bunch of properties that might be helpful for project committee.
okay, item number 5, project development subcommittee update and discussion with the committee. Krista Nielsen.
So we had a meeting last Monday and mostly, well, we spent some time talking about the whole Hugh Point moving goalpost situation and small ball versus big ball versus a hybrid approach of both. And we didn't settle on a singular approach, but I think we're kind of pursuing all options right now. We had gone through a map that Ty and Bond made of town-owned, state-owned property and properties over 5 acres in town that did have data attached to it in terms of a little bit of what John was talking about, wetlands, slopes, distance to parks, schools, downtown. And I had asked everybody on the committee to go through that and come back with ideas of parcels that might be appropriate for development. And to John's point, they're all parcels that have been looked at before. They're largely parking lots in town and the leaf pile. So we're going to continue to do some more investigative work into those parcels and kind of see what the pros and cons of each of them are. A lot of that research, I think, has been done times before. So it's as much kind of looking at the work that's already been done and figuring out how it relates to affordable housing as it is about bringing in new data. And then simultaneously, I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to start thinking about what parcels could be appropriate for a small ball approach and how we start to put an idea like that together. So we're meeting again the 8th, which before our regular full committee meeting on that day. I think we're meeting at 5:30 and regular full committee is at 7. So everyone's welcome to join, but at that point we'll have more detail on each of these parcels and hopefully I'll have some more ideas on small ball.
Thank you, Krista. 6, financing subcommittee update and discussion with the committee. Chris is not here. Maria or
I was there.
Jeff?
Maria?
You can go ahead.
Well, we had a.
Do you
good
want to turn your
conversation,
microphone
which I
on?
think you
Yeah.
said in
I'm sorry?
Jeff, do you want to turn your microphone on just so?
Oh,
There we
you
go. We had a good conversation, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the fellow's name. Finger? What?
I don't remember.
The fellow who was instrumental in forming the Greenwich funding. I can't remember what they call it.
It's their trust fund.
Their trust fund, their affordable housing trust fund. And it was really interesting. He set out some parameters that he believes permeate the town's thinking about affordable housing. And interestingly, he said, we have concluded, we being kind of everybody who's involved in affordable housing, both from a formal and official perspective, but also people who are generally interested. He's a developer who develops not in Greenwich, but elsewhere. And he said, we basically have canned the whole notion of even thinking about moratoriums. We don't think we could ever get there. We don't think it's worth trying to get there. I think he said they were at 5+% of their housing stock
Mhm.
was affordable. And then he went on to talk about how, what their principal objective is, as a town, but as this trust fund, was to offer to people who came to them with 830G proposals, to offer them what sounded to me like a very modest amount of money, and and at the same time, to allow them to move from statewide income.
State median
Median
income
income.
to area
Medium
median
income
income.
to area median income, because they are formally one of the governing bodies who's allowed to do that. So he said we could give them two things. One was a modest amount of money, and secondly, which he said was really what people were interested in, was moving their affordability definitions down to area-wide income. They've had a very difficult time finding funding. I think the seed money came from the town. I think it was actually ARPA dollars. And he said they have raised a very modest amount of money, like $30,000 from private sources, which was stated to be the principal source of funds when the trust fund was created. They've had, forgive me, I can't remember, it was maybe two handfuls of people come to them with formal applications or inquiry. They've made a modest number of commitments or near commitments to developers. And the way I understood it, he didn't give us a census of all the commitments they've made, but what I understood was that most of the developments that they respond to are relatively small, 4 or 5 family developments. And I generally thought it was, while it was very, very interesting, it wasn't much that we could take from it to repurpose it and use it in what we're trying to do. In part because the whole attitude was, we're not going to build any, we're not going for a moratorium. All we're trying to do is persuade developers who are interested in having affordable housing as part of the inventory and a development to raise the number of affordable housing units and to otherwise mold the development and some of the physical features of the development so that they'd be more acceptable to the neighborhood that the affordable housing was being built in. Is that consistent with what you remember? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I thought, it's interesting. I mean, Jeff, to your point, no challenge in finding financing and just listening. Frankly, I think our in-place affordable housing fund is a much better vehicle because it is a source of steady stream of revenue. And I think one of the questions I would ask the finance committee that we should look at, I think, is whether or not, given that we have something in place, whether what currently is being levied is the right level.
Or if we could enhance it and make it more robust, is that, and therefore?
Well, and I think it's already robust. I mean, it's personal opinion, and I've talked
Yeah.
about this over the years with everybody, with Scott, et cetera, et cetera. My own personal opinion is there is enough flexibility in the fund to be used for affordable housing initiatives. I mean, we heard talk about has to go through town council, but when I was chair of P&Z, I had a lot of discussions. What can it be used for? Can it be used for this, that, and the other thing? And I think the main thing that we've safeguarded so far is it has to be channeled towards, the town controls the distribution of the funds, which I think is critical. But just listening to him, and I said to myself, I'd much rather have the vehicle we have in place
It was pretty clear.
than go in her direction. And clearly there's another recurring theme. We heard it from him. We've heard it from the Darien town planner is we're relatively unique, not unique, it's the wrong word. There's a lot of other towns who've thrown in the towel on achieving moratoriums. But that's our mission.
Yeah.
So.
I haven't been even near convinced that it's the wrong mission.
And I'll just
Can
say
you
that-
guys please speak into the microphones?
Sure.
Sorry, Hillary.
It's
Sorry.
very hard to hear. That's okay.
We forgot you were there.
When we were
No worries.
revising section 7.6 of the zoning regulations 2 or 3 years ago to add the inclusionary zoning, we did make some tweaks to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, namely that as of right now, the money can only be used by the town, by the housing authority or nonprofit. So right now, we're not giving out money to private developers. But we also looked at that time at the fee that's being levied at the building permit and toyed with, is this enough? Should we, I was sort of like, let's just charge $50 per, 1,000 or whatever it is, why just jack it up. Let's make a lot of money here. But, and love the finance committee to look into this more. The feedback I got from the few developers I talked to was, no, there is like a threshold where you're causing a problem. Like you can raise it to a certain point, but you can't go beyond it. And the general consensus was the number we have is a good number right now. The other thing you should know is that, for instance, the project that Mr. Engel was referencing on Main Street will come in probably with 1, maybe 2 affordable units under our inclusionary zoning regs. They need 1.8 basically under our
Under
inclusionary.
the inclusionary zoning.
Right. And so I think what they're probably going to do is give us 1 in the building and then provide the 0.8 as a fee in lieu. And the fee in lieu money will also go into that affordable housing trust. This will be the first project that's ever done that. But that's another way money will end up in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Can you explain how the fee in lieu would work? Is it based on the percentage of the overall project? Because I think that that's one of the things that I worry about. I mean, I'm glad that we now have an inclusionary policy because it'll, going forward, we make sure that any larger projects have a certain amount affordable to them because what we've gotten through funds have not equaled what it costs to develop, that 12 or what is our percentage exactly that we do?
I think it's 15. I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll to the regulations. And I'm sorry that I get it confused, but there were many iterations of this. So to try and keep straight which one we actually.
Maria, it got argued over for about 6 months, if not a year, as
Really?
to what the right ratio is. So.
And in terms of fee and lieu, so we don't allow off-site construction of the units. So if you're building a project that triggers inclusionary zoning in New Canaan, you're either putting those mandatory 15% units in your building or you're paying into the fund. But we didn't leave open the door for you to say, well, I'm going to build my luxury units here and I'll build my 3 affordable units over here. Like it has to be on site or you pay in. And then in terms of setting the rate for fee and lieu, I'm trying to look up what it is, but we did like a multiplier, I think, of state median income, which is still not going to be quite the cost. I mean, I think it's like ends up being like 350,000 or something per unit, which is not enough. But we didn't want to make it so aggressive that, well, there was a fine line between, we don't want people just always paying the fee in lieu. So we can't make it so cheap that they pay into it, but we don't make it. I mean, one of the pieces of advice we got from Margarita and Greenwich was you want people to do the inclusionary zoning. If you make it too hard, they're just going to do an 830G. So we're trying to use the inclusionary zoning as an incentive. So, you got to give a little. So we weren't charging full price per se, but I'm trying to look up here while I talk what we actually put in there. All right, so the requirement is 15% of projects over 5 units. And there was a little bit of a incentive added into that we can allow a bonus to the total number of permitted units up to 15% as long as the overall affordability of the project remains above 10%. So basically it'll be somewhere between 10 and 15%, depending on whether they take use of that bonus. And the inclusion or the fee in lieu, we said it will be a one-time cash contribution to the Housing Trust Fund
equal to 300% of the state median income for a family of 4 per unit. The one upside of doing it this way is that we don't, some places put in an actual number like $400,000 per unit. Obviously, what it costs us changes over time. So we thought tying it to state median income, which obviously is going to also
It's a
change
natural
over time.
inflator.
Yeah, that sort of multiplier of that saves us from having to go back to our zoning ordinance every 3 years and say, whoa, our number's way out of balance. But again, all of this, and I mean, when we put this in, we had a lot of conversations, as John said. And we were like, we gotta put something out there. We gotta put a straw man out there and see how this works. And if in a year, 2 years, 5 years, if there's an affordable housing committee, someone says, hey, you really should be charging 400%, 500% of state median income. I mean, there was no special sauce. It was us
Yeah.
saying we gotta get something done.
How does Greenwich do theirs? Do you know?
I don't remember. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but.
So you said something about use of the funds from the Affordable Housing Fund. And John said that anybody could walk in and make an application.
Well,
Is that going to be rejected out of hand? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, John, I don't think is aware of what it says in here, which is that the money collected into the Housing Trust Fund shall only be dispersed by the town of New Canaan to New Canaan Housing Authority and or other nonprofit entities as authorized by the Town Planning and Zoning Commission for construction, rehabilitation, or repair of affordable housing.
Sounds pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, I don't
Wise.
think John was on the commission when
Yeah.
we made that change, so
That
he may
worried me when.
be thinking of a prior version.
Well, the prior version was even more loosey-goosey. but
Right.
Anyway. Okay, item number 7, Jane, discussion of future speakers.
Yeah, so my thought coming in here tonight was that we continue on small ball here next month. Coincidentally, I'd reached out to David Genovese to ask him for suggestions. It sounds, from what John said, that he might be one of a number of people we might want to have back to talk about it. But I just think there's still a lot for us to learn. I don't know if you all agree, but another person on our list is Rick Redness. I don't know, a number of you have recommended him. He's in Stanford and is actually an engineer, I believe, but has done a lot of projects, inclusionary zoning projects in various places. Also, Rich Townsend and I got together to talk about his idea of getting Habitat involved, which they have now been in Fairfield.
Yeah.
To build affordable housing, excuse me, build affordable housing here using their money. And their folks to do the pieces of it that regular humans can do, not the electrical, not the plumbing. But I thought possibly if it made sense in the context of next month, the Fairfield folks and Habitat folks could come talk for 15 minutes just about how that works for us to think about partnering potentially with a nonprofit. They're very well funded. They're also very popular in this community as well as other communities around here. And I mean, why not at least think about it as a potential ingredient? So those are my thoughts. We talked a little bit about what I thought was called land banking, but then was educated by someone in Stanford who said, really a land bank is when you look for properties that are, people aren't paying their mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitionally, but I think we were talking about finding ways to acquire land for purposes of affordable housing and how would that work if we wanted to do that. So those are the things that are on the table. Any other thoughts or suggestions?
I think Rick Redness is a great idea. In fact, he spoke to planning and zoning when you were doing the inclusionary zoning drafting.
He was probably one of the more helpful pieces of
Great.
feedback that I got on the inclusionary zoning.
And he's been doing a number of projects in Westport, speaking of Westport, along the Post Road, so.
Oh, great. Okay.
Anybody else on Jane? Speakers?
No, but Jane, if I come across anything when I'm noodling over small ball, I'll share with you.
Great. Thank you.
The Westport did do a cottage cluster recently. They got some estate land and they did some cottage clusters. We could potentially bring someone in to talk about as a small ball sort of thing, a cottage cluster development.
Great. I'll call you and find out what that means.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, super. And then, item number 8, Affordable Housing Committee Communication Strategy. Strike the word communications. So Affordable Housing Committee Strategy. So I keep bringing this up is at some point, we're citizen soldiers, right? And, we're bringing in speakers, we're building our knowledge base. But one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is at what point, do we need to, bring somebody potentially on the payroll, so to speak? So, thoughts there, I put Glenn Childer in front of everybody and there was a method to my madness, which is one strategy is, you bring in somebody who has worked with other towns on affordable housing strategies, who can do some of the work.
Well, John,
yeah.
if I might.
Yeah, please.
Listening to Glenn talk about what they've been doing, I was really quite interested. And I had a perspective on what Glenn does, and this was more expansive than what Glenn does.
We got to turn your mic on, Jeff.
Sorry.
Hillary, it's not my
Sorry.
fault. He
Sorry,
did it.
it's my fault.
Don't sweat it.
So what I was saying was, I found what Glenn had to talk about very interesting, especially how they brought, in essence, what I heard him say was they brought case studies in front of the public, and then the public discussed the case studies, and they kind of started to draw some conclusions about what was acceptable or what should be sought
Yeah.
in the form of affordable housing in those communities. I don't know what it would cost to have him come in and do that. I don't know if they do it at all, they do it a lot, or they just, had a couple of examples.
Yeah.
But somebody to do that kind of work,
Yeah.
I think it's really quite important that we start to build a case for why the town should not be naturally against affordable housing, why the people in the town should naturally be for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And I don't remember when it was, but somebody said in our early goings that we ought to just be really clear. Maria's talked a lot about how we politically might modify 830G or learn to use 830G in a different way, but I haven't heard anybody say 830G is going away. and so I think to have that sense kind of permeate the thinking amongst the townspeople could only be valuable to us when we start to talk about this project or that project or this strategy and that strategy. So that's I just feel, and you have talked about a workshop. I don't know if it's an opinion workshop or something like Glenn was talking about having done.
Well, and Chris and I have kicked this around. The way I'm thinking about it is all of the work that your committee is doing and the work that your committee is doing is we put together a town workshop in which you're pulling together a list of properties. And then one of the ideas is, so we get to a list of properties that the project committee says, these are obviously, this is the part of the bigger project. Here's a couple of properties that we think are viable for consideration. And the way potentially where Chowder can help is he's sort of a vehicle. He's the guy who knows how to do the process. But then on top of that, you guys come up with a list, and then potentially we get some architects on a pro bono basis because, and we already have ideas out there. I'm sure you guys have seen them flipping around. But part of the workshop is you show what a couple of sites could look like. So that could be part of the workshop. And then I even think, the financing aspect is, that's where you need education as well.
Yeah.
Because we all know how complicated this is. So that was sort of, we've committed to doing a workshop in the fall.
Yeah, I know. And one of our charges within the ordinance is to educate the town and the leadership of the town on the topic and what, beginnings of what might be done.
Yeah, and obviously by focusing on the workshop, this is process, right? how do you get somewhere? You establish a goal, you get to the goal is to do the workshop. So we get to the workshop, we're putting together our own game plan, then we get community feedback on it. And then the next step is then we make decisions as to what are we going to recommend to the Board of Selectmen, Town Council, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, and that as always, we don't have lots and lots of money. So quite frankly, one of the things I've been asking myself is, who is the right person? Is it somebody like Glenn, who is a process-oriented guy, but he's not by definition an expert on going out and how do you actually do a project? So, what is the right group of experts to have? But,
That's what I was leading to, was I don't know if he's the right guy, but it has to be a right guy out there.
John, if you're looking at New Canaan as a business, at least being a citizen who's really detached from a lot of committees, never been on P and Z and so on. I mean, I'm not sure whose responsibility is sort of overall planning and strategy for the town. And, you look at the lumberyard, you look at other areas of town, so what is the grand plan for that? And we do understand we have challenges, right? Housing being one of them, affordable housing, senior citizen housing, and so on. And so I had written down, my takeaway from some of the conversations we had was, all the things we don't have ranging from a database and so on. For me, I think the town needs a resource, or maybe we have it and I just don't know about it, that really is looking at this in a grander sense, and affordable housing is a part of it. And so, I think for me, I would just be, thinking about what's the long-term plan for the town?
Yeah.
How do we get from where we are to where we want to be?
Yeah.
Because, we talked about a lot of important things. We talked about parking, and, there's a whole bunch of things in that, right?
Yeah.
And so you almost need a grander plan. And even some of the properties we looked at for, Krista's committee's looking at, when you talk about this particular property, well, what are the implications for neighboring properties? And how does that fit into the grand,
Yeah.
Now, you could easily come back to me and say, ain't our job, we're affordable housing, and I got it, but I think the town needs that.
Yeah.
So, sort of
Is that what Sarah?
Yeah, I mean,
Is
so that's
working on the
basically what the
plan
plan
of
of conservation and development
Yeah.
is.
Why
and
Krista just,
The
Plan
plan of
So every,
conservation.
every 10 years, we're right in the middle of the process right now. Chris is a member of the subcommittee. Every 10 years, we're required to do a plan of conservation and development, which is very, we'll refer to as a master plan for where the town should go.
Zach, would that cover, the lumberyard, would that, for the cross street? I just don't know.
I mean, so from what I've seen so far, it's not, I mean, there will be a map in there, future land use, which is required. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't speak to it, but the policies that are being put in there, they're more general, like, yes, we need affordable housing and the town should be looking,
Yeah.
supporting the affordable housing committee and identifying
Yeah.
sites, but it's, in terms of what we're doing here, it's kind of left the door open to support us in whatever we say to do. It's not telling us what we have to do. It's
Yeah.
just saying, this is basically an important aspect of the town. But no, it's not going to put forth competing plans if that's what you're thinking for some of the properties that we're looking at. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably going to show them staying the same, which.
Not site specific.
well, even
thing.
site specific, but just if the plan said we wanted 500 units for senior citizens and 300 units for affordable housing, but at least if you looked at it from a business standpoint, it's a pretty good asset we have here, right? That would be, how you would approach it from a strategy standpoint, but I've never done it, so I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just saying that's what I think
Yeah,
we need.
it doesn't quite get to that granular level
Yeah.
of detail in terms of how many units and where you would exactly
Yeah.
put them.
And look, I'll defend P and Z as part of the problem is we are a resource constrained town.
Without a doubt.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I think we need to, it's going to your point on resources, and if hire the resource, and if it's part of P and Z, put them in P and Z. I mean, I personally, I know we're being broad here, but I think one of the problems is, you need more people power in the town government to get this stuff done than volunteer, right? Because at the end of the day,
Right.
that would be my suggestion.
Well, I I don't know if this, how factually correct this is, but, you know, for example, a couple of years ago, I compared the staffing in the Darien planning and zoning to New Canaan's planning and zoning. And I spoke to Kevin about this, and yeah, I've spoken to Deanna about it. We're understaffed
Yeah.
vis-a-vis other towns. But I think having gone through a previous plan of conservation development process and sort of keeping an eye on, you know, what planning and zoning is currently doing, is the good news or the bad news is it's up to us to come up with affordable housing proposals.
Yeah.
And I think it's up to us to, as we've been talking about, making and it's all recommendations, we've all agreed on that, we don't have to worry about language, is whether they should be 100% affordable or mixed income.
To your point about communicating with the town,
Mhm.
what do you think of John's suggestion that we have a formalized relationship with realtors? I also think of that group as a way to communicate with the rest of the town more than any other group of people working in town I can think of. How would we even explore something like that? And do you have opinions about whether it's a good idea or not a good idea?
As a realtor, I mean, I think the one thing I'll step back for 1 second. I do feel like our town in general, I don't hear a lot of negatives related to the idea of creating affordable and doing what we're doing. So I think there are towns, as someone who looks at many other communities and works with a lot of communities around the state on these issues, and from a legislative perspective, there are towns who are a lot more who can be more negative about it, but I haven't really found that within our community. And maybe that's because we've always had this fund, because we've already been doing this strategy for a number of years at Millport and Canaan Parish. So I think that some of that buy-in necessarily, I don't know that we need as much of that buy-in within our community of the concept. Now, in terms of where to put it and how to put it and showing those strategies and having, absolutely, we want to bring everybody on board and inform as to what we're doing and make sure as many people as possible are aware of what we're kind of our thought process and what we've come up with to date. But I think that that's probably the good news, is that I don't know that we have to sell people on the idea as much as we have to just sort of walk through the process and explain what we're doing here.
Well, listening to John, tell me what you guys think. What I said to myself to that point is we need to come up with the criteria of what let's say we decide we want to get into the acquisition development business. However, we need to come up to the criteria of what we want. And then we go to the realtor community and we say, here's what we're interested in. And I think that's what John said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
to
mean, I do think
incentivize
it's a
realtors.
good idea. I just think we're not there yet because
Yeah.
we haven't clarified what we want. But
Right.
down the road, I do think that would definitely could be an outcome of this process.
Yeah.
That we should keep open.
And the other person maybe is Francis Pickering, because I mean, he's really well versed in this and has reviewed it in a lot of different ways and is very familiar with 830G and the different ways to, so he might be a good person as well to present some of that to us. And
Maria,
he,
what
and
if,
he really knows our towns, obviously. And-
what if, you know, you and Jane updated him as to our progress? And what if we had him come back? Because, you know, Westcog should be resource rich, I would think.
And he has said that they are more than willing to help us with some of this sort of.
I mean,
Maria, where does he stand on the study?
So I keep hearing it's coming, but I haven't seen it yet, so.
Okay. Because the time, I can't remember, I guess it was when we talked here. It sounded like it was any week. It was like
Yeah.
around the corner.
I know,
Yeah, okay.
I'll check in again.
okay.
John, I just
Yeah,
wanted to chime in.
please.
So in terms of our communication strategy, a public meeting in the fall, I mean, I think Glenn could be the right person to lead that process. I do think that the subcommittee, as we further refine these sites and think about them, will need some help, at least conceptually, from an architect to help us figure out like what could fit on these sites, and so that we're not misrepresenting, the possibilities that they give us. But in terms of process, I almost think sometimes it's an advantage to have someone who's not super in the weeds leading the process, because then they don't really have a dog in the fight. And I think the public can sense that. So someone who's more process oriented, is just there to navigate the process. You'll have experts that know the details if you need them, but someone to just basically mediates the process is sometimes a good thing.
I
Maybe.
agree.
Should I go back to him?
That's a good idea.
Okay, I'll go back to him.
And I like the idea of using real pieces of land. He talked about hypotheticals. I mean, these would be in the sense that we hadn't recommended any yet,
Right.
but that they're actually places in town that could conceivably be.
Where
used
was,
for this
where was he
purpose.
based out of?
Glenn is in Simsbury, maybe?
Glenn, yeah, it's about an hour or so. I forget.
Yeah,
It's not next door.
yeah. Well,
Someplace,
I guess, I like the idea of somebody who knows Fairfield County, because I feel like
Well,
sometimes.
he knows this town quite well.
Yeah, I mean,
He
he
wrote
wrote
the
our planning
original,
Okay,
and
the
zoning
last
ordinance.
POCD, yeah.
okay,
And he did, if you remember his presentation, I mean, yeah, he knows us inside out.
okay.
And then if you remember, he did the study for Fairfield.
Mhm.
He did
Oh,
several
that's right.
towns,
Yeah.
several Connecticut towns.
Okay.
And obviously, so I'll go back to him. I'm not committing us to anything, and there's going to be a cost, and we have to go to the, the board of selectmen, et cetera, et cetera. So
Approval, yeah.
I'm just agreeing. I'll talk to him more about, maybe get a little more, firm on potentially how he could help us. So, okay.
I recall when Steve Kleppen was proposing rezoning Grove Street with, I think it was
Yeah,
Zone
I
D.
remember that too.
Yeah.
He had a presentation that showed massing on the
Mhm.
site. I'm not sure if he did that himself or if Glenn helped him do that, but I thought that was really helpful to see
Yeah, we had
the
a,
height and the massing of
yeah, we had a
structures there.
consulting firm do it. I don't think that one was Glenn. I think it was a different firm, but that study's available. We have that study. And then, of course, we also have the Cross and Biddy study.
Do you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's on the planning and zoning website.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree that type of drawing, conceptual
Yeah.
drawing of scale and density is kind of what we need for each of these sites.
Could we ask Sarah just to send us the Zone D study and,
Sure.
and the, Cross and Biddy study? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll put that in my notes.
And then, another speaker, speaking of Steve Kleppen, could be Steve, as I've said before, Steve over the years had suggested ideas, particularly for the lumberyard. So,
I have a lot of time for Steve. I know you do too, but
Yep.
when we were doing the hospital, he was really helpful
really-
to us.
yeah.
Really helpful to us.
okay, anything else, guys? Bob, anybody, left in Zoom land? Paul?
No, no one has their hand up.
Okay, Paul, do you have, any comments? Yeah. Kindly come up to the mic, please, Paul.
You have to hit the button, yeah.
Turns green.
Push the button
No.
down really hard.
There it is, green. It's color coded. Nice. I just wanted to mention that John Engel mentioned that Darien was much tougher on developers and builders. And I just wanted to point out that if you guys have been by Darien, you probably know that there's been a lot of development down there. And I think they actually have been working with them. So I had a brief talk with them out there, but about other things, but I'll have a continued conversation. But I just wanted to put it out there that a lot of towns, including Greenwich, is starting to work with developers. So just wanted to correct that. Maybe not all realtors know John works mostly in New Canaan, but just thought I'd put that out there.
Okay.
That's it.
Great. Okay, thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I heard Jane, second. I saw Mike, I heard Jeff. I heard Jeff before I saw Mike. Have a good night, guys.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you very much.
If you would like somebody to sit in the conversation.
You want to do it?
Yeah. I'd be very happy to sit.
That's a great idea.
I mean, I know you know.
Actually, Jeff, it would be helpful to have